So, welcome everyone to this panel on starting out as a prisoner's rights lawyer. Everybody ready to go? Yeah? So, welcome to this panel on starting out as a prisoner's rights lawyer. I'm Sharon Dolovich. I'm here on the faculty at UCLA, and I'm the faculty director of the UCLA Prison Law and Policy Program, which is sponsoring today's event. Today's panel is really the unofficial kickoff of the UCLA Prisoners Advocates Conference, which is going to be held over the next couple of days here at UCLA. This is a biannual national gathering of prisoners' rights lawyers from around the country. We're expecting about 180 or so people. Now, these are the people who do the work all over the country of representing prisoners and advocating on their behalf. Now, as you know, there are a lot of prisoners who will be here over the next few days, some of whom are on this panel. They do remarkable work, but relative to the legal need, it's a relatively small community. So that is where you all come in. You are the people in this room, the people watching us on YouTube. You are the next generation of prisoners' rights lawyers. And I must tell you that your contributions are eagerly awaited. We're looking forward to having you bring your energy and enthusiasm and dedication and smarts to the really urgent problems of making sure that people who are in custody are treated humanely and trying to figure out how to bring about meaningful criminal justice reform, which, as you will know, is sorely needed in this country. So that is the aim. The aim of this panel is to help you think about how to get started. Many of you will be already doing some of this work. Some of you may not have done it before, but are thinking you might want to do it. And so we are here today to sort of try to give you a little sense of some of the pathways you could take to working on behalf of prisoners, some of the obstacles you might face and how to overcome them, the skills you will need. These are the kinds of things we're going to talk about today. Now, in a moment, we're going to turn to this enterprise directly. But first, there are a number of people that I really need to thank. First, I want to recognize Brenda Kim, Sydney Trong, Jamie Libanate, and Jessica Blatchley, who have worked tirelessly for weeks and months, and in the case of Brenda and Sydney, for over a year to make the conference happen, to make this panel happen. So we're incredibly grateful to them. And I also want to especially recognize and thank UCLA 3L Rekha Arulanantham, who is right here. And she is the reason, she was the one who had the fantastic idea for us to broadcast this panel on YouTube to try to reach people who are interested in doing prisoners' rights work around the country. Now, I should say she will not be happy with me if I don't tell you that the UCLA Prison Law and Policy Program is on Facebook and Twitter, thanks to her. So please like us on Facebook, right? That's what you say. And follow us on Twitter at UCLA Prison Law. So thank you for that. And with that, I want to turn it over to the panel. We have a really fantastic group today. The bios are at the end of every row. There is a packet with one-page bios of all the participants. They're a little different than the bios you usually see at events like this. We asked everybody to give you a sense of their pathway, so you'll see it on paper. If you're on the YouTube page, you can click on a link to see the bios. So I'm just going to give you their names and affiliations, and then I'm going to turn it over to each of them. They're going to talk for 5 to 7 minutes each to give you a feel for how they got started doing the work that they're doing. And then we're going to have a conversation among us, and then we're going to open it up for questions. So we have with us John Adcock, who has his own practice, civil rights practice in New Orleans. Michael Bean, who is the founding partner of the law firm Rosen, Bean, Galvan, and Grunfeld. Mercedes Montagnes, who is a prison litigator in New Orleans with the Promise of Justice Initiative. Lori Rifkin, who recently brought her solo civil rights practice to Hadsell and Stormer here in Pasadena. And Michelle Rutherford, who is at the law firm of Dechert. So, John, I'm going to turn it over to you to start us off.
Sure. Thanks for inviting me. I haven't been to Los Angeles in a long time. The weather is much better than it is in New Orleans, as much as I love New Orleans. The way I got started off in this is quite straightforward. I was a second grade teacher for a year, and because I wanted to do something more political to help more poor people, I came to New Orleans to worked for a nonprofit that was representing poor people facing the death penalty all over Louisiana and Mississippi. And I always joke to people that the real reason I did that is because death row inmates are much more well behaved than any second grade student I had in my classroom. And that still proves to be true. And so I did that as an investigator for about 5 years. And so I would go around and visit with clients in prison, talk to witnesses, marshal evidence, get records, that kind of thing. And did a lot of really good work, hard work that I'm really, really proud of. But I was, you're always, a victory in a death penalty case is often you take this person who's a living, breathing human being and a very complicated but has many aspects to their personality, which makes them a full human being. And the best thing for them is to spend the rest of their life in prison. And I frankly just didn't want to keep doing that. I frankly didn't want to spend Sundays, as I think about them, going to visit mothers and aunts saying, your son and your nephew, the best thing for them is to spend the rest of their life in prison. That just got too hard for me. And I wanted to do something else. So when I was in law school, I tried to pursue something that didn't have to do with criminal defense or habeas or death penalty stuff. And my second summer, I made sure I did things involving civil rights, so police stuff and prison stuff. And during that, I worked for this office in Atlanta, and we were suing this old age and infirm prison in northwest Alabama. And it was a very small prison. There's probably like 60 prisoners there. And while I was there that summer, my job was to go out and help make sure that the answers they gave in discovery were actually what they thought and before we turned it over. And I went to this prison, and my previous experience was, when I was an investigator, you'd have someone who's mentally ill, someone who's not in touch with their family, someone who's not getting their medication, someone who had a heart condition or an injury to their ankle, whatever it is, it just wasn't getting treated. And frankly, since I was trying to save their life and work on their case, which was an all-consuming task, I just didn't have time to do that kind of advocacy. And of course, it goes without saying that that is what affects people's life in prison more than anything else, is those kinds of things. And what was remarkable, when I would go visit these guys in this prison in Alabama, and bear in mind, this is an old age and infirm prison. There were prisoners there that had serious medical conditions. However, they only had a doctor come to that prison once every 2 weeks, which is the reason we were suing them. And what was remarkable is the day I went there, they were actually taking people to the doctor. There was a bus that would come and pick up 2 or 3 or 4 prisoners, and they would take them to the doctor. And my clients would say, the only reason they're doing that is because y'all are suing them, because y'all are watching them. And it had a profound effect on me, the way you can basically use the law and sue people, and they start acting right when there's scrutiny of them. It's very, very straightforward, and I'm seeing it now. And so that's how I got into basically jail and prison litigation. And then after I graduated law school, I wanted to stay in New Orleans, and there was no nonprofits, no offices at all doing prison litigation at all. There's a few wonderful, really dedicated and gifted private attorneys in private practice doing it, one of whom is my mentor, and but there's no place to do it. And so I went and worked in various nonprofits. I was a public defender. I worked for the Innocence Project. I did a little prisoner stuff, and was oddly kind of happy to stay away from it, because doing the death penalty stuff, I actually had, I think what you would call, I think the term now is secondary trauma from witnessing all this suffering, that I kind of didn't want to go back into it. And then I got this case, but I went into private practice, which I'm going to talk about later in a minute. Went into private practice in 2009. In 2013 or 14, someone sent me this case that I'm still working on now, that of a guy who's serving a life sentence at Angola, that's our maximum security prison, who had cataracts. And he had cataracts, he was diagnosed with cataracts in 2011, and by 2014 he still hadn't had surgery, and he went blind. He was declared legally blind, he couldn't see, and he was given no accommodations, no cane, no nothing. And that was the case I got, and it struck me as the craziest thing in the world. And so that's the case I'm working on now, and we managed to get him surgery. We've uncovered at least 35 other guys who are in his position. and we're getting them surgery too. We just beat back and won a good ruling on summary judgment in June. And basically, we're rocking and rolling, having a lot of fun, and doing a lot of good. So, so that's my short story of how I got into this.
Hi, I'm Michael Bean. Different kind of story. I graduated from law school and went a much more traditional route. I took a job with a corporate firm that interviewed at my law school, and mainly to get out to San Francisco, where my wife and I wanted to be. And at that firm, I was doing litigation, business litigation, antitrust, securities, and they had an opportunity to sign up for pro bono cases and also to sign up with the federal court and say, you know, I'm willing to take an appointed case in certain areas. And the areas included prisoner rights, and I had checked that box for some reason. I didn't have any background from law school. It was just something that I thought if I was going to handle a case, it would be an interesting thing to handle. I got an appointment, and the firm approved me doing it, and it turned into and they really supported me. I probably over-litigated the case. I had a lot of resources. I was able to hire experts, take discovery, and ended up learning a lot about, my client had claimed that he was being involuntarily psychiatrically medicated and treated against his will. And the most remarkable thing that happened a couple of years into the litigation was that a guard admitted that he had been crushing his meds and putting it in his food. So he was actually being poisoned with meds. He actually needed them. And one thing we found out was how inadequate psychiatric care was for someone who was seriously ill. He was in San Quentin at the time. And we ended up, he filed his own handwritten complaint, which the judge had decided he wanted to find a lawyer for. He had asked for $1 billion in gold and some other types of relief. I didn't get that, but we did get an injunction that governed his care. We also got a ruling that required Department of Corrections to change its policies and procedures for involuntary mental health care, both hospitalization and involuntary psychiatric care. And then I just rolled right along and I moved for an attorney's fee award, and we got a very substantial attorney's fee award. And my very conservative firm said, "What's this?" And I said, This is an attorney's fee award. I said, "We can't accept that. This is a pro bono case." And I said, "Well, this is part of the statute. I mean, it's to incent people to take these cases. It's also to incent the defendants for not to violate the Constitution. And also in the litigation, even though it was apparent that they were violating my client's rights, they fought tooth and nail and did all sorts of things to delay. So, I pushed them and I said, I'm going to ask you for more cases down the road to just put this money aside." Anyway, we fought about it, and they finally took the award. They usually have represented like the opera pro bono, things like that. They're very controversial. And sure enough, a year or so later, I was asked by the prison law office and some other lawyers to see if I could cajole my firm to get into a much larger case, which would be a class action against a single prison that provides at that time, all the medical mental health care in California. It was the California Medical Facility. And we put together a coalition of 3 or 4 large firms, the ACLU, the prison law office, and brought this case. And that case that was called Gates. The first case was called Whitaker. And that case went to trial after a couple of years. It settled with a consent decree. There's a bunch of Ninth Circuit published decisions in that case. But I was responsible for mental health care. So I became an expert in case one. I convinced the firm to take the money and fund me in case two. And again, I spent tremendous amount of resources in the second case. By the way, that case also ended with a very substantial attorney's fee award for plaintiff's counsel. It was many years later. But anyway, based on that, those experiences, I had completely caught the bug. And I saw these tremendous inadequacies in the system. And I also saw that the litigation skills that we had developed and used in large, complex antitrust litigation, securities litigation, could be used effectively in the same way in prison litigation, because they have, experts and complex issues. So at that point, I had met a couple of, I was now a partner at this firm, Froberg, Flager and Harrison. It's now defunct, part of Morgan Lewis. At that point, it was one of the largest firms in California. And I decided to leave the firm and form a new firm. That was in 1990 with Sandy Rosen, who had done a lot of prison litigation. We started with 3 lawyers, and now we have about 17 or 18, and we do prison litigation, lots of other things. Shades.
So again, my story very different from the last two. I went to law school really interested in criminal justice reform, which I think probably a lot of people in this room did. And that's kind of an interesting area because there's a lot of different tactics you can kind of take when you think about what that means. And I took Professor Dolovich's class, and I learned a lot about the PLRA. And the PLRA is like one of those pieces of legislation that can make you really angry, like really angry, right? Because it's so directly targeted at preventing probably the most vulnerable people in our country from having access to justice in the most direct way. That's why they wrote it. There's no ambiguity. And it's kind of devastating when you really think about what that's doing. And I took Professor Dolovich's class, enjoyed it, was really interested in it. I clerked for 2 years and had a front row seat to how the PLRA can keep people away from court, can keep them from having their issues litigated, as well as a lot of judge-made law that's these sort of doctrines of qualified immunity and deliberate indifference and all these other sort of doctrines, judge-made law. We talk about judicial activism. To me, those are some good examples of judicial activism. I mean, bad examples, but examples of how it goes both ways. And saw how that kept people out of access to justice. And I went to work in a death penalty office in Louisiana. Full disclosure, that's my husband. And they were grappling with some really horrific conditions at Angola, Louisiana's maximum security facility, and sort of at a loss of how to deal with it. Years and years of watching our clients suffer, specifically in the heat, specifically our mentally ill clients suffering in extreme heat. In 2006, the Department of Corrections built a new death row facility in Louisiana, South Louisiana, without air conditioning, which is, just absurd if anyone has spent any time in South Louisiana. And so sort of on with a lot of bravery and being a little perhaps naive about what I was undertaking, we just went for it and we started litigating on conditions. And like Michael, you do 1 or 2 cases and you catch the bug. And there really is something to be said about how a visit from a lawyer can change a person's life. And I've seen it happen in my medical class action suit time and time again, where I meet with someone and I have the emails that, immediately the doctors get emailed, Mercedes Montagnes met with this person, and that person gets care. So the impact that you can have on someone's life is really just incredible. And so that's my story.
Great. Hi everyone. My story also different from all of the ones that you've heard a little bit, which I think is a good sign for folks and how to get into this. I very much wanted to be a civil rights lawyer. It's why I went to law school. And for me, I had focused on civil rights as really looking at discrimination in all different facets. Free speech. It was my dream to work for the ACLU. That's what I wanted to do. That's what I was focused on. And that's what I went and did after law school. I was a staff attorney at the ACLU of Connecticut. And there were only 2 lawyers there, small state, small office. I was the only staff attorney and was doing all these other things that I really liked to do involving discrimination, free speech, some police stuff, all of that. We'd inherited, and for those of you who've done already prisoners' rights work or will, you'll become very familiar with these kinds of cases. We'd inherited these long-standing cases where somebody had litigated a condition about provision of mental health treatment, or in the women's prison, something to do with protecting the women from sexual assault. And they'd won injunctive relief, and there had been a consent decree that was put into place with some kind of monitoring provision. And sometimes, especially in small offices in smaller states or states where there aren't as many lawyers, you get these and there's no resources to really monitor them, and they sort of fall by the wayside. And that's what had happened over the years. And my boss and I decided that we were going to go into some of these prisons together on the mental health piece with a protection and advocacy group in Connecticut and try to figure out what were the conditions now. These cases were 10 years old. Did we need to take a bigger role? And I, didn't know anything about any of that and went in to those prisons, and it was interesting and very depressing. Very, very depressing seeing the conditions that people were in. And there was an opportunity to go to the first Prisoners' Rights Conference, of which this is now, I think, the 4th. That was also hosted in Los Angeles, and I said, well, I don't know anything really about what I'm doing here, so I think I'm going to take advantage and go to that, and my boss encouraged me to go. And there I went, and it was amazing. These 2 federal judges, Judge Henderson and Judge Carlton, from the Eastern District of California and the Northern District of California, who were overseeing cases that Mike was very involved in. Huge class actions about the California prison system and the medical and mental health care being provided. This would have been in, I think, 2004, maybe 2005. They talked at the conference after overseeing these cases for years. And it was really inspiring. And there I met a much even smaller than 180 group, a group very small enough to fit in this room for sure, of prisoners' rights lawyers, including Mike. And I thought, wow, I think, I want to go do more about this. But I wasn't thinking, oh, I want to only go do prisoners' rights. I still had sort of this general civil rights perspective, but I was very interested in this and very interested in litigation. So I did. I went and worked for Mike as my next job, and got to work on these big class actions where I realized we went into prisons all over California and saw the horrific conditions people were living in. Got to work with a small group of attorneys who were extremely passionate about this work. Something I'll talk about later in the panel. Mike has this private public interest firm, civil rights law firm, which I've never heard about. I went to NYU and nobody had ever talked about that. I didn't know anything that those existed beforehand. And so I got to learn all about litigation from people who knew how to litigate, and I got to work on all these cases. The funny part, and I think John kind of talked about this, is after a few years of that, I was working specifically on these problems of the revolving door of people with serious mental illness in and out of the criminal justice system, and it was really difficult. And I thought, well, I am not sure that this is what I want to do all the time. And so I decided that I wanted to go do some more general civil rights stuff again, and I went back to the ACLU. and discovered that, thanks to Mike in part, I had the bug, and I couldn't leave it behind. And even though I wasn't working on those cases anymore, I was obsessively watching them and thinking about them and sort of dipping my toes in and doing everything I could with criminal justice, even in the more general civil rights practice. So I ended up going to the U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division Special Litigation Section, which that name is meaningless. But what they do is they enforce CRIPA, which is the Civil Rights of Institutionalized Persons Act, so jails and prisons. They also do enforcement of civil rights regarding police misconduct, so all of those big investigations that have been talked about in the past few years, starting with Ferguson. I mean, they started with other ones, but that's what you might have heard about. They do that, as well as some other areas of jurisdiction. So I went there and did more of that work, and ultimately decided that I was going to start my own practice as a general civil rights practice, but very much focused on prison work. And one of the things that I wanted to do, I'd worked on these broad class actions, injunctive relief, and sort of working for the government, and had seen that even though we got amazing relief that really bettered the care of many people, all of these individuals would still slip through the cracks. And there seemed to be no remedy for them. So I decided to work on individual damages cases. And so that's what I did for the last 3 years, as well as other areas, and started co-counseling with another civil rights firm, because these cases are pretty resource intensive, and it's fun to work with people. And so I recently merged my practice with theirs, where I continue to do jail and prison work as well as other civil rights work.
Okay, I think I hold down the big law moniker on this panel, and I'm actually very proud to do it. I graduated Columbia in '08, and big law was not the most natural fit or next step for me. I had spent 6 years building a career at Planned Parenthood in Texas as a health educator and a program coordinator, and went to law school thinking, great, I'm gonna apply to the ACLU, I'm gonna go work for the constitutional CCR. Both of those institutions rejected me my first summer, and I ended up at the U.S. Attorney's Office, which, again, not where I would have ever envisioned myself, but instructive and motivating in so many ways. I was in the Southern District of New York, probably one of the best places you could be if you're a very crunchy liberal like myself. And I walked out of that thinking, okay, next year I'll take them up on that offer to work at a big firm and make a bunch of money because I have a bunch of bills. But this is sticking with me. And when I did OCI, my campus interviews, I was exceptionally cautious about where I interviewed, and had a career for 6 years, and I made sure, following 2 things at each firm I would talk to: did you have a pro bono practice that counts all of my hours, and what is your promotion of people of color, women, LGBT individuals to the partnership? How are they treated at the firm? Those were my 2 main criteria. I don't care who your clients are, I don't care how great your white collar people in DC are, that was what I cared about. Because I sort of had in the back of my mind that I wanted to do what I could to sort of marry these 2 areas of practice. I remember certain people in law school who sort of, I think I was called a sellout a couple of times, more than once, more than 3 times, who knows? And it hurt a little bit, but at the same time, I realized that there was always going to be, I was going to be in a place sort of explaining why I do what I do and how I got into it. And I clerked for a year. I went to the firm that actually took over a bunch of the Brobeck folks after y'all were done in San Francisco, and just had this amazing opportunity. If you want to kind of sum up how you get into this, no matter which path you take, I think it's opportunity, it's interest in the work, and then it's dedication and hard work. I mean, this is never easy no matter which area you're litigating it from. I have so many more resources to bring to bear, than Mercedes and John, and at the same time, it's an internal struggle a lot of the times. You just have to be ready and willing to say, this is what I want to do, and you have to know why you want to do it, I think. And that's also something that can develop over time. It might just be something you're interested in, and you don't know why, and you just keep coming back to it a little bit. I think of what Lori was saying, kind of knew why, but you just kept coming back to it, and that's important to allow yourself to develop that interest and see where it goes. My opportunity was amazing. As a second-year associate, I had Melinda Hay, who just stepped down as the U.S. Attorney in the Northern District, And Martine Sibeli, who used to train public defenders in San Francisco, basically be my entree into doing post-conviction work. Melinda was a partner at my firm and popped into my office one day and said, do you want to go to Vegas with a former FBI agent and interview some witnesses? I said, boy, do I? Yeah, that's absolutely. Do I have to take all this document review with me, or can I? She's like, don't worry about that. Go for a couple days. She was an amazing advocate and a person who also married this sort of big law and pro bono work, and never once told me, she would not back down when the firm pushed back on costs. She would not back down when the firm pushed back on how much time we were using. This was important to her. She was trying to, prove a man's innocence. Fast forward a little bit, I got incredible training. And then I'm in New Orleans, which is how I met both John and Mercedes, and find myself in a much smaller litigation boutique. I had done one or two sort of Section 1983 cases, very small for sort of minor things in California. And so I'd had a little bit of experience, and I'm at, as New Orleans goes, right, I'm at an outdoor barbecue one night, and I meet this woman, Emily Posner, who's a great solo practitioner on civil rights in her own right. And she's gotten this, just out of law school, she has this brand new case, brand new client for Mr. Kenny Whitmore, who was good friends with the Angola Three, which some of you may be familiar with. He was in a cell next to Albert Woodfox and Herman Wallace for many, many years at the Louisiana State Penitentiary. But he wasn't part of all the things that went on that kept those men there. He had a separate sort of situation, but was politically affiliated with the Black Panther Party. Emily had decided to take on his post-conviction case, and he had filed pro se to get out of solitary. We talked about it one night. I said, if you've got questions, I know people, habeas work is hard, give me a call. I get an email 6 weeks later saying, by the way, do you want to take his pro se 1983 solitary confinement case? I said, yes, absolutely. So there's a theme here. Never say no to any of these things. You never know where they're going to go. And that was really where I cut, I think, my teeth individually, and just even working with other people. That was the case where I was at a much smaller law firm. I had known how to litigate cases from a big law perspective, where you throw everything out there that you can. I had received amazing training, and now I was under-resourced, and it was mostly just me and a couple of the lawyers at my law firm who could help. And then I think I called Mercedes a couple of times. I called my old law school con law professor. I called everybody because I knew I wanted him to get the best representation possible, and even though I knew how to litigate, this was a whole new world to me. So if you find yourself ever in that situation, don't be afraid. Take the case, do what you can, but never hesitate to reach out for the resources, ask the questions, go see who you need to see, because this community is amazing, and you will never, the people that, I found out a friend of mine works at Barry Scheck's shop. Like, you could just go and you find all these people, and people love to talk about this work, and they will be there, and they will help you. So you'll probably hear me say that this, I think this is a theme really among everybody, that it is that bug, right? It's like once you hear somebody say what Mercedes has reiterated, and I actually had a man tell me this just yesterday on the phone, thank you so much. Nobody has ever helped me or paid attention or done the things that you have done for me. And in the back of your mind, you're like, wow, that's really good to hear, because I was worried I was not doing the best that I could the entire time, even though I was trying really, really hard. You just want to keep doing that, because you see, at least from like the big law perspective, I like to marry all the resources that we can to the cases that just don't get them. And once you're able to do that, and you're able to see how that plays out, even if you don't always win, it's just something you want to keep doing.
So, thank you all. Fantastic. Really inspiring, and also I'm delighted that everybody has a different story, right? That was the hope, that you could show that you can come through this work through many pathways. So I have a couple of questions that I'm going to throw out, respond if you have something to say. So the first thing that we want to start with is the question of skills development. So what advice do you give someone about how to develop the skills that they need to litigate on behalf of prisoners? I think some of you started to answer the question, but jump in.
I can, when I was thinking about this idea, I really think that you need to go to conferences like this one. There's a lot of resources available. Also, I'm a real believer in not just studying with and meeting the plaintiff's lawyers, but go meet the enemy, and they're not the enemy. Go to corrections conferences, go to correctional mental health conferences, go to mental health conferences, go to other areas so you understand these are human beings that are working in corrections. What are their motivations? What's driving them? What are the resources, limitations that they have? What are their goals? And I think to become much more effective in this area, you have to understand corrections. You have to understand, what is it about? How does it work? What are their motivations? How are they funded? And I think at the beginning, when I was doing this work, I had no idea. It was just about, my client's getting hurt, and and I think I became much more effective when I was able to say, you say your objective is X, Y, Z. Is there a way we can help my client and achieve your objective? For example, someone who needs care in prison is going to be released to the street. They're supposed to be about public safety. So isn't it better that this person gets some care and get some training and get some experience out of solitary before you release them into your neighborhood? So that makes some sense, and so I think that you got to find things like that. So I think learning a lot about the area is important. And I also become a big believer in not just litigation, but litigating through or achieving goals through multiple areas. So learn how to communicate as a movement, community groups, learn how to communicate with the press, legislators, leaders, use social media to really figure out how do you change the minds of the people in control about our clients, who people basically hate and fear. And that's really a big thing. And judges will come along if the rest of society moves.
I would say, too, on the skills development, when I was in law school, there was a huge sort of thought that if you wanted to do litigation, you needed to go work at a firm. And I was not about that. I spent my first summer at the ACLU LGBT project and my second summer at Southern Poverty Law Center, but I wanted to litigate. But pretty much everyone said, to build litigation skills, really think about going to a firm. But I had a mentor from one of my first summers who had done that, and he was a great litigator. But he saw me for me, and he said, I tell everyone go to a firm, you don't go to a firm. and that's true. I would never have made it as a lawyer if I went to a firm, or a corporate firm. That said, I do think, so I came very much at it from a public interest, nonprofit, multi-pronged advocacy perspective, like Mike just talked about. That said, I think litigation skills are incredibly important, and in doing this work well. And so I think there are a number of ways to get those litigation skills that don't involve necessarily going to a corporate firm. Some nonprofits, some public interests do litigation really well, either because they have people who trained at firms or because they focused on that. I was lucky enough to go work at Mike's firm, where I got incredible training in litigation, but there's lots of other ways to do it too. When I was working at the ACLU of Connecticut and was the one staff attorney, we had a board. We had an advisory board of all of these people who were litigators, and I did exactly what you said, and I would call people up. It didn't matter, I would call people up. I have no idea what this form looks like. I have no idea what I'm supposed to do here. And so there are all of these resources. I think we have a prisoners' rights listserv where people are always asking questions about litigation. So I think thinking about the ways in which you can get those skills if this is something you want to do, and they're transferable. It doesn't have to be in prisoners' rights either. It can be, 1983 is very broad, all kinds of government discrimination and bad actions you can pick off. And so I think I think one of the skills to develop is litigation, but encourage you to think broadly about where you can get litigation skills, and I can definitely say that you do not have to go to a corporate firm in order to get the litigation skills you need. The firm that I now am a partner at also is very well known as a trial firm, and they litigate all sorts of things, and almost no one there has ever worked at a corporate firm. I'm not trying to knock the corporate firm. I benefited hugely from Mike's training at the corporate firm, but for those of you who are like me and wouldn't be able to really be happy in that environment, there are lots of other ways, I think, to go and get the litigation, and they don't always just look like, you know, going to the ACLU or something else. There's lots of ways, I think, to get litigation.
If I,
Yeah, please.
just real quick, if you do go to a firm, just let's say, I mean, it is interesting. It's always been a constant crisis of identity for me working at a law firm, but it's fine, I'll be okay. But, you know, if you do go to a firm, go to one that tries their own cases. If this is what you want to do, and this is the kind of pro bono work you want to focus on. Look, firms out there, Dechert, all of my hours that I do in pro bono count. I do hundreds of pro bono hours a year, and they're not going to even get mad at me for saying that. One year when I was at my prior firm, I did 750, you know, and it pales in comparison to what these guys do who do it every day, but at the same time, you do get to bring those resources. But if you're going, find one that's dedicated to it, double check, look in the NELT forms, look at Vault, ask the people that work there, do they really count your hours? And then make sure they try their own cases, because if you want to get litigation skills, trying cases is like, that's the #1 way. Which the other thing I would add in is no matter where you are, start small. Take landlord-tenant disputes, take, you know, a custody hearing, take the smaller things, not that a custody hearing is small, but, you know, take some smaller types of cases that you can go in, you can walk into a courtroom, you can feel comfortable arguing, you can have 1 or 2 witnesses, you can put on evidence, because you will make mistakes and you will learn, and then you won't, you know, be up, well, you will be up the night before of your prisoner rights suits, but you will feel a little bit more comfortable when you're having to do things that seem to be a little bit larger in scale.
So I have actually a number of questions that I want to ask each of you individually, so I'm going to do that now. So John, I want to start with you. So you started your own civil rights practice, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what advice you would give somebody who might be considering taking that route.
Sure. There's several. The first thing you should do is, I think the best thing you can do, if possible, if you're going to open a civil rights practice on your own in a certain locale, is to work in a nonprofit in the subject matter area of your practice beforehand and generate some kind of reputation before you open your own practice as someone who works hard, who there's no drama, and you don't take credit for things. That's a whole nother matter. The second thing is you should plan for it. I mean, what I did is there was basically nowhere. I want to be in New Orleans. I love New Orleans. There's no place where I could do the criminal defense, civil rights stuff, and then political rabble-rousing that I wanted to do in any one nonprofit. And so what I did is I literally identified the kind of cases I wanted to do and the kind of principles that I wanted to govern my practice. And then I wrote up a memo for myself, and I identified the revenue streams that were that were consistent with those principles. And I put together what I thought my overhead was going to be, and I was like, this is what I can do for the first year. I can get appointed to cases in criminal court. I can be a guardian ad litem. I think that's in juvenile court. I never did that. I can ask these 3 or 4 mentors who have these gigantic cases if I can work on those, and they could pay me to do the kind of the grunt work on those files. I used to be an investigator, so I can do investigation on cases and generate revenue that way. Basically jump into the middle of it, get cases, get experience, but also make a living doing it. You know, pay the light bill, that kind of thing. So plan for it and be smart about it. Don't be silly about it. That's the most important thing. And to know that you can actually be someone in private practice who takes money from clients to represent them and still treat people well. I mean, I have a kind of a promise I have to anybody who calls me that if I can't take your case or I can't help you, I'm going to find someone good who can. I'm going to make sure that I pass you off onto good hands. And so when you do that, people know that you do that, and they reciprocate that. They send cases to you too. So I think it's to be a part of the community that you start your practice, if possible, and to plan for it and be smart about it, and know that it's not going to be comfortable. You're going to have to do everything there is. You're going to have to wait in line at the post office. You're going to have to do your own paralegal work. You're going to have to do all that kind of stuff. So that's my 2 minutes on it. So.
That's great. Thank you. So Mercedes, I wanted to ask you, so you did mention in your opener that you started off leading the fellowship, right?
Yes.
And so I wanted to ask you, so there are a number of people who want to go the fellowship route as a way to kind of leverage that work into a more full-time thing. So I wonder what advice you would have for somebody who wants to try to leverage their fellowship in that way.
So the way I leveraged my fellowship was a little unusual. And I want to say, you know, I just want to tell this because I think it's important. You know, the first year I practiced, there was a live execution date in Louisiana, and I filed a lethal injection suit, and I litigated a live execution date. And if you asked me to get involved in a case 2 months before an execution date right now, I would say, no way, no how, absolutely not. And I was really lucky. We stopped the execution, okay? Because if in your first year of law practice, someone ends up dead on your watch, it's not gonna go well for you in the future. So I want to say, I want to tell that story because I think it's an important piece. You know, you want to find the right balance. You don't want to play it too safe and go and do doc review for a nonprofit for a year and walk away without much experience, without much contribution to that nonprofit, and without having really created something for yourself. You also don't want to go sort of to a place that isn't litigating at all and file a bunch of lawsuits and get in over your head and not produce quality work. Because again, that's gonna, John talked about this, you know, when you're a lawyer, my mother was a lawyer, she was a solo practitioner, she took everyone who walked in the door. Her word was her bond and her reputation was everything. And that is how it is when you're a lawyer. And I think that's important advice for any young lawyer. So, but you wanna go into your fellowship immediately thinking about how you're going to create opportunities for yourself in the future. So I was applying for grants for the organization as we wanted to get more involved in this new space of litigating sort of bigger impact litigation. So immediately I was raising money, I was tapping into people, I was calling up experts. I called up Professor Dolovich all the time when I was drafting things, and I was equating myself with the field really fast and starting to build those relationships. And that's a really exciting time in your life. And you gotta kind of just say, I'm gonna be working 80 hours a week, and that's just what it's gonna look like. I think that's important. And you know, the options are, and you know, I'm a lot like Lori, I don't think I would have done well at a firm. But I think if you're a person who can succeed in that environment, then that's where you're gonna put your time and you're gonna leverage it. If you're not, if you're gonna go the fellowship route, you have to embed yourself where you go. Because a lot of nonprofits, ours included, we take fellows with the anticipation that they will turn over in a year or two. And that transition from fellowship to career is a struggle. And in our organization, we try really hard to work with folks to make sure that they have new jobs, that they have new opportunities, that they're building on their career, and that we're placing them and helping them get placed. But not every organization has the resources to do that, and so that's another thing to think about when you're applying for a fellowship. What are the track record of their prior fellows? Talk to their prior fellows and really try to emphasize that. But nonprofits are bare bones operations, and so to the extent that you can be building out other pieces of involvement, making yourself really embedded in that organization, I think you're much more likely to be successful there.
Thank you. So Mike, to you. So talking to my students, I know that there are people who say they would really like to do this work full time, but they are feeling pressure to go to a firm maybe because of loans or other financial obligations. So I wonder if you have any advice for that group of people.
Two things. One, as Laura mentioned, you know, there are different kinds of firms. So our firm does a range of work. We actually hire people, including from UCLA, but we're paying right now approximately half of what a corporate firm is paying. So there's certainly people who cannot afford to give that up, explain to their folks, you know, I could be making 170, but I'm doing this other work. So I understand that. I do think that you know, the path through a firm, I agree very much with what you were saying, Michelle. Firms are so different one from the other. You know, you really have to investigate a lot and know what you're doing. I don't think it's a bad thing to go to a firm at all. I think if you pick right and then advocate for yourself once you're in the firm, what kind of work you want to do, what kind of experiences you want to do, you can get great training and get your loans paid off and then be well situated to either stay there and succeed or go off and do something on your own. I do think that practicing law and prisoner rights by itself is very, very difficult. Just to set a place up and say, I'm only going to do prisoner rights. Very, very difficult. And I think that really the key is to diversify, to know how to do various things, and that also helps you as a prisoner rights lawyer. In other words, we do disability rights outside of prisons and jails. We do employment discrimination outside of prisons and jails. We do Title IX outside of prisons and jails. We do business litigation. All those skills and areas help us be better lawyers for our clients in the prisons and jails. But they're also satisfying and rewarding. So I think that anyway, I don't think there's anything wrong with a path to taking a job at a business firm or otherwise, but just do it carefully, know what you're getting into, and be ready to jump out when it's time.
Thank you. Okay, Lori, question for you. So as you explained, you worked in many different practice areas before you ended up where you are now. And I'm wondering what advice you would give someone who wants to wind up doing what you're doing, but is concerned that paid positions in prisoners' rights are too few to make it really feasible.
So, I think that's a valid concern. And I think there's a number of things. So yeah, I have worked at nonprofits, I've worked at a private civil rights firm, and I worked for the government. And I was able to do prisoners' rights actually in some manner in all of those. And I think whether you're specifically here because you want to do prisoners' rights, whether you have a broader interest sort of in criminal justice and don't know what that's going to look like, or you are interested in civil rights, I think this advice applies to all of it, is again, especially when you're coming out of law school, not to focus on one particular organization, but to look broadly at opportunities where you're going to get transferable skills and be working on things that you care about. I think that, for example, I think at a law school like UCLA, I went to NYU, it's easy to get caught up in what I kind of call brand name kind of organizations and say, well, I'm really interested in prisoners' rights, so I'm going to go work for the ACLU National Prison Project or the Prison Law Office, and that's it. But that, I think, and especially I've observed friends of mine, that is a constricting view, because lots of places across the country, you've heard about all the amazing work in New Orleans, and all over the country there are people at small nonprofits, at small firms, at the big firms, that's the biggest firm in North Dakota, that is the co-counsel to the tiny nonprofit because they have resources and happens to now have expertise in prisoners' rights law. There are these opportunities, and it's about going to some place where you're going to get mentorship. I think that's huge. Mike continues to be my mentor, through all of these years, and we get to work together, and that's awesome. And it's about somebody, I really think, I've obviously gone through a number of situations. It took me a while to find the right environment for me, and part of that was mentorship. I think that's for me that was always a very overwhelming thing to hear. Go find a mentor. How do I find a mentor? That relies on me happening to stumble into somebody who likes me, has time, wants to invest in me, all of those things. But I think especially when you look at smaller organizations for a fellowship year, I didn't do a fellowship year, but lots of people have successfully done that. Finding somebody with skills you want or who's going to take an interest in you, I think that's one of the biggest things. And financially, I will just say it's been a struggle. My loan repayment program was not The best, when I moved to places with geographic sort of big cities that paid more, it didn't calibrate geographically. So that was difficult. It was really difficult to pay off loans and fund it. That was definitely a challenge, and it's a choice that I made, but you can come out of it and do it. I think it's a matter of balancing sort of what your priorities are, but not just priorities, what the demands on your life is. And so I think that's really important. I think this perspective that you can find a way to do things you care about in all of these different kinds of environments is really important, because I was one of the people in law school who was like sell out. I do not use that word now. Now I have a much broader and richer understanding of what it's like to do this work, and I would, and I hate the law school me who said sell out.
And to be clear, all of us work with big law all the time. And without big law, none of my cases get filed. You need big law. You need friends in big law who you can call up and say, hey, you want to partner with me on this case? Because that's the only way I get co-counsel.
Speaking of friends at big law. So, Michelle, you've already talked some about how you managed to do the amount of pro bono work that you've done in your firm, but I wonder if you have anything else you want to add for people who are planning to go to a big law firm and are hoping to do as much pro bono work as possible. Is there anything else you could tell them?
Sometimes I look back at the amount that I do and I'm like, oh, they really still let me get away with this. This is great. Because there's 2 points to that I think are important, and Mike hit on one, which is you have to advocate for yourself. You have to go in and you have to say, these are the things that I want to do. Find the partners that are doing the work. There will be them. Find the senior associates that are doing the work, and remind them that this is a benefit that inures back to them. Big law loves good press. An article came out today in Law 360, Dechert, top pro bono firm in the country. Great article, go ahead, read it. But that's the kind of stuff that the next time, if somebody gives me a phone call and they're like, oh, your budget for your investigators, I'm like, I'm going to send you that article. You can tell me how you feel about it. And then I'm going to send you the one where there was in Time magazine where we got the guy to solitary confinement. And then you can just talk to me about my budget after you read those. And don't be embarrassed about it. Don't, people in big law constantly worry, am I going to make partner and I'm going to do this? You got to forget about that because you don't have control over it anyway. Build the skills to become a good lawyer. Do the good work, and it will, if it doesn't work out, that wasn't the place for you anyway. And the second part of that, in addition to reminding them of how beneficial it is for them to be able to report all of these things to NAP and Vault and the press, is that I don't want to call it guilt, because I don't think it's guilting them, but I think, look, everybody, every lawyer, even the big law corporate ones, they went to law school because they liked it. It's a calling, it's a profession. You take an oath to uphold the Constitution, to represent people who need help. And somewhere in the back of even the oldest partner's brain, that is still there. If you have to slip them a copy of, Matthew McConaughey, Lincoln Lawyer, go for it. But, I've made pitches before to partners and I said, look, we have duty. Look at us. We are the whitest, most resourced place in the country. If we don't step in and help, who's going to step in and help? It's not just something that we can do to look good and press. It's our duty, and it's an honor, to be frank. And I think sometimes you can sort of go into that conversation with them, especially even in it's almost now they're like, yeah, we've heard that before. When I was the first, second, third year, I think it worked even a little bit better because they're like, oh, that's cute. Look how gung-ho you are. But it's hard to say no to that, if you're like, look, I'm going to get your training, I'm going into court, these are the skills you want me to develop, and don't you want to feel like you did a good thing? I remember pitching the case for Mr. Whitmore when he was in solitary, and of course it was a much smaller firm, and they were like, what are we going to, what about the money, what about this, what about that? I said, the guy's been in solitary confinement for 35 years. And the partner looks at me, he says, okay, so I'm not just going to tell you to take it, I'm going to encourage you to take it, I'm going to do what I can to help you be successful. And then after you've got the case, just don't, pull together all of your resources, reach out to your friends, they're going to reach out to you, and just don't ever be embarrassed with the pro bono work that you do at a firm. Don't ever let anybody tell you, that's a pro bono case, you need to do this first. If you have a court date coming up, that takes precedence. Don't ever, if you're at a firm, some people might be like, oh, it's a pro bono case. Our firm doesn't do that. I've never worked at a firm that's like that, but I've heard of these stories. And you just have to be an advocate for your client. It's a client of the firm, just like any other client of the firm. So And call me if you need somebody to help you with that pitch. I'm happy to, many more lines I can throw on you, so.
I'd also add that trial experience is a good thing. You know, at the big firm I was at, I mean, we were doing business litigation and nothing ever went to trial. And I had trials because the Department of Corrections never settles. So I had trials. I mean, you know, and I've done, you know, lots of trials in my career, and almost all of them have been in prison and jail litigation because they're political. I mean, because politicians don't let them settle, is the real truth. And for getting big firms to come in, it's very useful. When I get a firm to join us in one of these cases, I promise them that your associates are going to get trial experience. We're going to train them. They're going to actually get up there and do it. And I've been the partner that's trained, you know, numerous associates who've never stood up in court, and they got to do it because their firm was working with us on a prison case. So that's the other way of getting, you know, firms to do it.
Yeah, I had more live witnesses in court in front of a judge and a jury by my third year than number of the partners at the firm I was working at. So it's a very real tool in your box for advocating for this kind of work.
So I think we're going to open it up to questions. So questions from the folks in here. Anything you want to ask?
There's one on the.
Yeah. So start with Lena, then I'll go to this one.
So a couple of you clerked, and I was wondering to what degree were you able to sort of, it sounds like you had a lot of these sort of orientations about like, or ideas about like how the prison system worked or something like that prior to clerking. And I was wondering to what degree that influenced you or that could influence you at that sort of level.
Meaning during your clerkship?
Yeah. Like in terms of what you're recommending or discussing.
Well, of course, my judge made all the decisions while I was clerking, and so that's an important caveat to make whenever you're discussing the substance of your clerkship. But I do think that, you know, at least where I clerked, there was a separate magistrate judge who would make a separate decision involving all prisoner cases, and I think putting an extra eye on that and really spending time on that is a really critical piece, and some judges encourage or discourage that as being a source of time more and more. A lot of the prisoner cases are not counted in the same way that other cases are, so one of the ways that federal judges are kept on their feet is that there's like a running list of pending motions and cases and how long they've been pending. The prisoner cases are often segregated from that, and so they worry less about letting those sit. And so taking the initiative to take those up, the ones that are assigned to, I think is key. The other thing is just, you know, you're gonna have these moments like someone has a forfeiture and you're looking at the signature and you're like, that looks like the FBI agent signed it for the person and they didn't ever actually get served, and that's on you, you know, how diligent you wanna be when you're looking at these cases that can really affect people's lives. So yeah, I think it's about diligence. I think the judges rely on you to be diligent, and how you're diligent affects the outcomes of people's lives dramatically. The power you have when you're a clerk compared to the rest of your career is...
I just actually want to add one thing about clerkships. For those of you who are still thinking about applying for clerkships, you should really strongly consider applying to magistrate judges in federal court, because they are the ones that get all the pro bono or pro se prisoner petitions, and you could make a huge difference if you're sitting in the magistrate's office and you are going through the petitions to try to decide which ones have merit, which ones should get court-appointed lawyers. That also is a position of incredible power in this area in particular. Yeah, please.
I'm just going to add one more thing. I had no law experience. John was an investigator. He knew how the world worked. I had none of that when I became a lawyer, so clerking was like so vital. And I would just encourage you to not think about the prestige, but having the experience, if you're in a state district court, wherever you are, I know it's sometimes we all like to think about the prestige of those things. Getting the experience of seeing the court system working is so
at the trial level.
At the trial level.
And if any of you want to go work at the 19th JEC in Baton Rouge, please do. That would be amazing.
Yes.
You guys could go assist that criminal docket.
That would be awesome.
That'd be great.
Please do that.
But commissioners even, that'd be great.
So we have a question from @KimAngelo8. And the question is, how can I get involved in prison law, prisoner advocacy work during law school? So,
I need a couple interns. Not kidding. Anybody who's interested, let me know.
I mean, there are summer positions, and also sometimes law clerk positions at lots of places, both some of the not-for-profits, some of the private firms. We usually take one summer person. We sometimes have people work during the year. I also think that there's a lot of things you can do as a law student, working on just contacting people and say, I'm willing to do research, do help out on a case. I think that you just ask. I think people, sometimes it's hard to even think of getting help when you're so, how do I even come up with an assignment for this person? But I think sometimes when it comes through, I think usually when it comes through a law professor, this is a good person, they really want to do this work, can you come up with an assignment or something? That's something we can do, and I think a lot of people in the field do that.
I'm actually going to say a few things about this. One thing is, you should contact prisoners' rights organizations, as Mike said, and we have compiled what we call a summer job search guide. It's basically a list of many of the prisoners' rights organizations around the country. So if you want to get in touch with me, dolovich@law.ucla.edu, I can send you a copy of that list. So you can apply to those places for summer programs. You can ask them if they have externships. You should also, if somebody comes to speak at your school, a lawyer comes to speak at your school about these issues, don't be afraid to go up to them afterwards and say, in the way Mike just suggested, I'd love to help you on your cases. Do you have a piece of research I could do? Is there something that you could do to bring me in? And I've had students who've done that and ended up getting fantastic experience while they've been in law school. So I think one of the themes is be proactive. You have to do the research to figure out who's doing the kind of work that you want to do, and then make sure that they know who you are and that you are ready and willing to help them.
Can I say one
yes,
thing about
please,
that
please
too? I think too, again, sort of thinking about the experience you want to get while you're in law school. I think you heard from all of us that for prisoners' rights, there's some subjects, where you feel like, well, I didn't do it in college, so I can't it's too late to get into it in law school, or I didn't do it in law school, it's too late to get into it in the rest of your career. This is not one of them. We need people, and people are more than willing to mentor you and bring you into the prisoners' rights fold. But to me, one of the most important things about doing prisoners' rights work is knowing the constituency, knowing the people that you're helping. So when you're in law school, it's not just about the prisoners' rights organization. Public defenders' offices, legal aid offices, places where you are going to interact with the people who will be your clients and understand the issues and challenges that they face and get to know them as people. Some of you may have experience through family members, through friends of folks who've been in and out of prison and jails. Most of us do know folks, especially if you don't. Go volunteer at places where you are going to understand people, because part of what we do, I think the best we aspire to is not just changing medical care or mental health care or solitary for people in prison and jail. It's also understanding the richness of people's lives. Mike gave an example, thinking about what is this person going to have access to when they're released? What do their families need? What's it like? How often are they getting to see their kids? Are they able to get mail inside, outside, phone calls? Understanding, you can work with advocacy organizations. I work with California Coalition for Women Prisoners. This is made up of women both inside and outside, and a lot of former prisoners who do advocacy and can speak to the experience and what people need inside in a way, I certainly can't. So don't look narrowly, if you're interested in this issue, just at certain types of organizations. Look at gaining experiences that are going to inform the work that you do.
I just actually want to add something you just said about legal aid reminded me. We have one-page biographies of all the panelists that give you a feel for kind of what their pathway was like. There's one bio in there where the person is not up on the podium, and that's Melissa Lee from Columbia Legal Services Institutions Project in Seattle, Washington. She was going to be on the panel, she couldn't be, and she still sent her one-page bio. And the reason I point you to it is because she took yet another route to doing full-time prisoners' rights work, and that is she started working at legal aid. And at legal aid, you're going to be, like Lori said, meeting all kinds of people who have real world problems that run the gamut. And many of those people will, they or their family members or community members will be affected by issues related to incarceration. And so you're meeting people, learning about their lives. And, you know, Melissa was able to, you know, she ended up developing the skills and working towards doing the work she's doing now. So I saw another hand. Question?
You guys all alluded to this, but specifically to Mr. Adcock, just about your experience in the public defender's office, and if you could speak to that in terms of litigation experience or how you liked it overall.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So being a public defender is a tremendous experience. I think if you want to make it really valuable and a worthwhile learning experience, the times I felt like I was able to grow as a lawyer, as a public defender, is when I had things to plan for, a trial or a big hearing, and had time to address and deal with the obstacles presented, whether it be an issue of law or something like that wasn't working, figure out how to get around that, how to present it in court, how to fight back about whatever the state was going to be saying in that particular hearing or at that trial. I was only a public defender for about 8 months. I couldn't take it anymore. But I was able to do that, I don't know, once a month. And so it's important that if you're a public defender, especially in New Orleans, we have wonderful people that work there, but they're overburdened. They're just going from crisis to crisis. It's triage, or guilty plea to guilty plea. And so you don't have the opportunity to do that. So make sure you go to an office that's resourced, where you have investigators, and you actually have the time to spend on your cases. The other thing I learned, which I think is crucially important to being a practicing lawyer, is if you're pushing issues in a case, there are usually positive, unintended consequences from litigating an issue. And so it might not be the relief that you're asking for, it might come in a different way, but being aggressive and pushing things is usually a good thing in a case. Obviously it's particular to each case, and I learned that being a public defender. The third thing that was really important to me is when a judge is doing something that's wrong, whether they're breaking the law, whatever it is, and you stand up to that judge, you really stick your chin out and you say, "Here it is, Judge, let's go after it." And he comes back at you, and then you win. Like, that is a tremendous feeling, and that happened several times to me in really wonderful ways, in really serious cases. And it was tremendous, it was really valuable. All those things were really wonderful learning experiences, and usually the people you work with in public defender offices are really cool. They have, in terms of my view, they have great politics. They really care about human beings on a human being level, or else they wouldn't be helping people in jail and people charged with crimes. And they're usually pretty hard-working people. So, in a nutshell, that's what I'd tell you about being a public defender.
So we are almost out of time. I wrote down a few things that I just want to emphasize that I heard from you folks, and I'm going to invite you to add to the list. So here, just in no particular order, some of the things that we heard about that are helpful advice for folks who want to do this work. So do what you can to find mentors. Lori talked about that it seems like a challenge, but if you go to conferences and you make connections and you take initiative, you will meet people in this community who will want to help you. Diversify in terms of the kinds of cases that you're taking and the skills that you're going to be able to develop, because they're going to be useful in this area. What you learn in any area is going to help you here. Ask for help. There are an awful lot of people who, join the Prisoners' Rights Listserv, where people are every day in real time helping each other, answering questions about, can I have this case? Can you, how do I file this motion, etc. Everybody is available to you. I think that those are the main things that I wrote down. Anything else that I'm forgetting that you want to add?
I just want to emphasize a theme I heard, because I think it's so crucially important, is to be good at anything, you have to practice it. And if you want to be a litigator, you have to litigate. You can't talk about litigating, you can't watch other people talk about it, you have to do it. And getting in there and doing it in a smart way, not a foolish way. You don't take cases where you're in over your head, but getting in there and not being in the gray area, but being in the arena, that makes such a difference in terms of your decision making going forward and your abilities going forward. So I just want to emphasize what I've heard about that.
And I think one thing I would add that I've heard from the panel, and also just know about some of the panelists, there will be times when doing this work where you are frightened and you don't know what's going to happen, and you're doing the best that you can, and you're not going to be able to get rid of that, but that's okay. You be fearless when you're doing it. Don't, know that you're doing the right thing and you're advocating on behalf of the right causes, and don't let people push you around. John stood up to judges. I had both Mercedes and I had to stand up to the wardens of big institutions, and it's okay. You walk out of the room and you take a deep breath, and it's amazing what can happen, and to the extent that you can balance that with making sure, as John said, you don't get in over your head. Still, just go out and be strong advocates, because this is a group of people who just don't get that very often, and these people are exemplary, I think, of that kind of advocacy, and I could only recommend and hope that you end up like these guys. So
I'd also add just that I really think that you need to learn a lot about the criminal justice system. So I read everything that comes out. All my Google alerts are about prisons, and there's lots of public information. There's lots of books. You need to learn about racism in the system. You need to learn about the statistics. You need to learn, because I think that makes you a better advocate in this system. So you have, litigation skills you can get, but if you're someone who really understands the criminal justice system, and I didn't learn anything in law school. I learned, I had one criminal law course, and we talked about murder and mens rea. That was it, period. Okay, and there's so much to learn about the criminal justice system. As lawyers, it's embarrassing how few lawyers know anything about the criminal justice system. You know what parole is, or probation, or how it works, or how to get revoked, or do you know what reentry is? Do you know what the racial statistics are about your jurisdiction? I think that this is all publicly accessible, and if you have that knowledge, and it's very easy to get, and then you're going to look a hell of a lot better when you come in looking for a job, and also you can do a better job as a litigator.
I would get the Daily Marshall Project updates.
Yeah,
Those are
that's
very, 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 very helpful.
Email updates.
I was just do two things. One is we talked about litigation a lot, but those of you here or watching may be thinking, I don't really want to do litigation for various reasons. There are lots of other ways to do prisoners' rights advocacy as a lawyer. You could work for Human Rights Watch and do policy work. We need people changing policy. We need people doing public education. So all of us here are litigators, but fear not if you don't want to do litigation. And then I always just say this on career panels, because it's been really important to me, and I don't think law students hear it enough, which is no matter what, it is okay to be your authentic self in your workplace, and you don't have to compromise that. And there's a lot of pressure when you go into legal environments, no matter what they are, and I've worked in all of them except corporate, but all of the others, and I'm assume there's a lot of pressure to just accept certain kinds of demands, treatment, whatever it is, and you don't have to. You can do the kind of work you want to do in an environment that supports you. And I just really want to encourage you, because you will be happier, you will do better work, and you will get better results if you take the time to find a place that values you.
So on that note, we are a little over time, which I apologize for. Before I ask you to join me in thanking the panelists, I wanted to say, in line with what Mike said about learning as much as you can, tomorrow, all day tomorrow and all day Saturday, we're going to be hosting the Prisoners Advocates Conference. There are going to be something like 18 panels and speakers. They're going to be live tweeted, most of them. So if you want to follow us at UCLA Prison Law and hashtag Prisoners Advocates 2016, you can follow along with some of the panels. And now I want to thank everyone here and actually